morning or good afternoon, depending on where in the world you're signing in from. I did see there were some Europeans in the audience, so I hope you're enjoying a lovely evening on Friday, and thanks for joining us. As always, thanks for taking time out of your day to join us for a live webinar. I'm joined today by Ian Bliss, CEO at Northern Shield Resources. Ian, how are you today?
I'm very well, and thank you very much for that introduction again, Romeo.
Awesome. So here's how today's going to work. Ian's going to walk us through a quick presentation, looking at about 15 minutes, and then following that, I've got some questions for Ian, but then we'd love to entertain questions from the live audience in the room today. So there's a chat button in the bottom right hand of your screen. Please do feel free to pose a question at any time during today's event. We'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can today. If for whatever reason we don't get to your question, but I reckon we probably will, I will make sure that Ian gets your question afterwards, full transcript of the event, so that he can respond individually. Last piece of housekeeping before I throw it over to Ian for the protein. Today's event is being recorded, and that recording will be available for replay in probably the mid-afternoon Eastern time. So you certainly get it before the end of your workday, as long as you're in the Americas. But without further ado, Ian, I'll throw it to you for a presentation.
Thank you very much, Romeo. And welcome to Northern Shield's presentation as part of the Promising Explorer series entitled Center to Center and Vectors to Gold, and why Root and Cellar's findings are just the tip of the iceberg. This presentation is meant of a summary of the methodical exploration and advancements that we've had at Root and Cellar to date, and why we think we are on the verge of something very special at Root and Cellar. If you want greater detail, this is available on our previous presentations on our website. Forward-looking statement advisory as normal. As some of you may know, Northern Shield is well regarded as for thinking outside the box. And we are not followers. We initiated our own projects, either in conjunction with prospectors or on our own, in areas that are underexplored and that have the geological conditions that support the notion of a giant and high-grade ore deposit. And while many view greenfield exploration as a risk, we see it as an opportunity, and that's an opportunity to discover a tier 1 asset near surface and at relatively low cost. And we don't believe those opportunities come around very often. We implement a detailed model-driven approach to our exploration strategy to try to reduce that risk to ourselves, our shareholders, and the environment. And that strategy has served us very well, because as you will see, it has led us to a very intriguing epithermal gold, silver, tellurium, and related copper porphyry discovery at Root and Cellar on the Burin Peninsula of Newfoundland. And as I say, I believe we're on the verge of a notable discovery. The original mineralization at Root and Cellar was discovered by a local prospector, but from day one, the evidence of something significant was not lost on Northern Shield. Although the markets have been most unkind to the juniors, especially those exploring early-stage projects, we believe tough times breed innovation, and we've now diligently put all pieces of the puzzle together. And I'm going to start this presentation with the conclusion. And we believe the finished puzzle will look something like this. And I'm going to summarize how we got here in today's presentation. But when it comes to greenfields exploration for large blind ore deposits, we don't believe either the evidence or the location gets much better than this. So Root and Cellar is located in the Avalon terrain of Newfoundland, which is broadly similar to BC's Golden Triangle, that, as we all know, hosts numerous tier 1 gold and copper assets like Brucejack, ASM, and Goliath, which we hear a lot about these days. But whereas BC's Golden Triangle has been explored for a better part of a century, and mined and not just explored, the Avalon has only seen 2 decades at best. And in the case of Root and Cellar, it has seen no exploration whatsoever until Northern Shield optioned the property from a local prospector. As I said, we're looking for giant ore deposits, and geological conditions must support that notion. And extensional tectonics is part of that and really form the foundation of the potential of a giant ore system. The rifting or extension provides ideal opportunity for large-scale epithermal gold systems to the enhanced magmatic activity. And if you're enhancing magmatic activity, you're also enhancing the likelihood of hydrothermal activity as well. But extensional faulting also allows for very large, low-pressure windows with great depth extent. And it is this sudden drop in pressure that creates boiling and gold precipitation in epithermal systems. It's not the increase in temperature, it's the drop in pressure. So if you have an extensional environment, basically popping of the crust, that creates large, low-pressure windows that extend from the top of the fault down to the bottom of the fault. And so just from sort of some regional conditions, this very much has the evidence of a giant ore system. And on top of that, what really sets Root and Cellar apart is their presence of tellurium. Tellurium is a critical metal, as a key component of solar panels. It's actually one of the rarest of the critical metals on the planet, and 8 times more rare than gold. The primary source for tellurium is as a byproduct of a handful of epithermal gold, silver, and copper deposits, much like the model we have at Root and Cellar. Currently, 90% of the world's tellurium is sourced in China, with the second biggest producer of the United States at only 5%. But the reason why I like tellurium in this case, and why you should like tellurium, is that it's often associated with very large and high-grade epithermal gold systems, such as Cripple Creek in Colorado and Comstock. So a quick overview of the project. To say, gold was first discovered at Conquest by a local prospector in a hand-dug trench in 2012. And Northern Shield is the first exploration company to conduct methodical exploration on the property. The property hosts 5 gold showings over a 6-kilometer strike length and a very large copper-bearing area in the southwest portion, which we actually believe pre-existed the gold mineralization. 3 of these gold showings, Drop Zone, Windfall, and Braxton Bradley, are characterized by very high silver to gold ratios and also very high grade tellurium. But in the center of this is a Conquest Zone, which has been our focus of our exploration to date. And as you'll see, we believe Conquest has all the ingredients of a very large epithermal gold system. If we start zooming into the Conquest Zone, gold mineralization and soil anomalies cover an area about 4 square kilometers of the Conquest Zone. These gold anomalies overlie deep-seated IP chargeability anomalies, as well as magnetic lows, and these are controlled by 2 different structural sets, largely in the north-south direction and in the east-west. Critically, most of the gold we see in the Conquest Zone, other than in the Center Mound or Discovery Trench area, much of this gold is what we call leakage. It's not the primary mineralization for what I believe is the main ore body. It's a big leakage of contacts and faults subsequent to the formation of the main ore body. We also have numerous gold-bearing boulders with up to 111 grams per ton. So we have not found the source of these to date, but they're within a few tens or perhaps 100 meters, but very, very proximal. And we have significant visible gold, as we'll see in the Discovery Trench area. So much of this presentation is going to focus on just a portion of the Conquest Zone, and specifically the Discovery Trench area. And so if we zoom into the Discovery Trench area, we believe this is the tip of the iceberg. And in 2023, we went back and started expanding that trench that the original discovery was made by the prospector. And in that process, we discovered about 8 occurrences of visible gold, and also, more importantly, the identification of what we call crustiform colliform banded quartz veins. These are the classic quartz veins you get in epithermal systems. These veins also contain a mineral called adularia, a potassium-bearing mineral, and this all tells us, again, we're getting closer to the heat source that's bringing up all these gold-bearing fluids. So this trenching program was followed up by a very small drill program, 500 to 600 meters, but 7 out of 8 drill holes intersected gold mineralization. So this image shows a combination of both surface sampling and drilling. And so you see an area about 100 meters by 40 meters wide. We have nearly continuous gold mineralization. Some of it's low grade or moderate grade at 0.6 over 34 meters, with sporadic high grade. It's up to 78 grams per ton in grab samples on surface with visible gold, and 23 grams over half a meter in drill core. But as important as these gold values are, one of the other critical bits of evidence in this drill program and trenching was the identification of hydrothermal vent breccias, sinter material, and what we call geyser sediments. And here's an example of these critical pieces of evidence that we got in drill core. First of all, these hydrothermal vent breccias. And again, these occur, if you can look at this diagram on the left, which is a classic epithermal model, those breccias occur at the very top of the system. You often hear me compare Root and Cellar to Hawaii, New Zealand. They have a lot of these hydrothermal vent breccias at the top of the system. They actually sort of form an umbrella above the veins. Sometimes there's a gap between the breccias and the main veins, and other places they're contiguous. But more importantly, we have these hot spring sediments. So if you think of Yellowstone National Park and that geyser, that is essentially an epithermal system. Probably down below there, you'll get into an epithermal gold system. And so these muddy sediments that we see in drill core, the remnants of those pools of of hot fluid and mud that would have formed around that geyser sediment. So that's at the very top of these. Same, we see these sinter fragments. These are all very, very clear evidence that we're right at the top of an epithermal system. So first of all, the whole system is intact, nothing has been eroded, but it's very much pinpointing where the main vein should be. Sometimes there's a gap of maybe 300 meters when you look at some of the Mexico systems. You look at Fruta del Norte, the veins come right up underneath this sinter now. And the other interesting thing at Root and Cellar is we're seeing a lot of gold here, including visible gold, as I've said. And you don't usually expect to see gold at these levels. You don't expect to see it until you get down into the boiling window. So the fact that we're seeing it in the sinter mound level at the paleo surface bodes very well as to what we think we're going to hit in drill core once we get into that boiling window. So why are these sinters so important? Well, if you take the Fruta del Norte example, which is an epithermal gold occurrence in Ecuador, this was a blind system. And it was first found by recognizing that there are certain gold anomalous silica horizons and based on the chemical signature, they recognized that this was leakage from an underlying epithermal system. They drilled 3 holes. The first one missed completely. The second hole intersected that sinter horizon, and the geologists recognized that as a sinter horizon, knowing that if the sinter horizon is there, the top of the epithermal veins are not far away. They steepened the hole, and the next hole hit nearly 240 meters of 4 grams per ton gold. And so similarly at Root and Cellar, the geology, geochemistry, and geophysics have identified that sinter terrace. You can see it on the IP here. Near surface is a flat line IP chargeability anomaly. And that's why we now know we missed in 2021 when we drilled underneath it, because it wasn't a vertical target, it was a flat line body. But that vectors us back to what we think is the feeder zone, which is now where that Discovery Trench area is sitting. So again, these sinter terraces provide very good vectors and indications to the main vein systems. I won't spend too much time on this, but in addition to all that, visual observations of evidence and textures in drill core, we now have some very innovative geochemical studies being undertaken at Root and Cellar as part of an MSc thesis project. And that thesis student went back to look at data from Wahi, New Zealand, where they came up with these chemical charts and discrimination plots that was simply plotting potassium versus sodium. And in Wahi, New Zealand, when you're getting high potassium and low sodium represented by these red dots, you are right above the main veins at Wahi. So he used the same sort of plots using our data. And what does it do? It shows that at the Discovery Trench area, you're getting these very high potassium to sodium levels. So this was completely independent of our visual observations of the drill core. But again, it just reinforces that this was the right area to be starting to look for the top of the main vein systems. And this is where it gets very, very intriguing and quite compelling. So with all the geological, geochemical, and mineralogical vectors that we have, this is all now supported by a very compelling geophysical target. This image shows a 3D shell model of a magnetic globe. And so you must remember that the fluids that form these epithermal gold deposits often destroy the magnetic signature of the host rocks. And so they're associated with magnetic lows. And so this is a plan view of that 3D magnetic shell model. So first of all, note the very close correlation between the gold mineralization that we're seeing on the surface, represented by these red squares, and this underlying magnetic shell model. We also have IP anomalies represented by these red hash marks that also correlate very closely to the edges or sort of changes in the morphology of this magnetic lobe. And so if you actually look at that, that's a plan view. If we now look at that in cross section, it gets even more compelling. So first of all, think back to that epithermal model that we just showed you with the sinter terrace, and almost it looks like a tree-like structure. This magnetic lobe looks almost exactly the same. Significantly too, the modeling shows it goes down to about 800 meters depth. Now, inversion modeling in magnetics is not always accurate, so this may not be 800, maybe 600, but it's a very considerable depth extent. But to say the morphology, the shape of this matches the classic epithermal model. More importantly, look where the Discovery Trench area is, and this is why we call it the tip of the iceberg. You can see this almost arm or offshoot coming off this main magnetic shell 3D model. And that's where we're getting 78 grams per ton gold on surface and those drill intersections, and it matches exactly this sort of offshoot of this magnetic lobe. The 2021 drilling sort of sits over here, and we believe there's a fault clearly cutting up sort of almost along this armpit of this arch offshoot. And the gold that we intersected in 2021 almost certainly is this leakage up a fault zone from that. Quite significantly, too, we see a change in the morphology of this magnetic low at a depth of around 150 to 200 meters, where below that it gets quite sort of bulbous and actually quite large and a stronger magnetic low. And we believe that's because there's a series of such cap rocks in here that are trapping the fluids. As these fluids rise up this fault zone, they hit this cap rock because it's impermeable, and they begin to flood out below that. And so it's below that level that we see, number one, good IP chargeability, but it's in this sort of area that we expect to see some bonanza grades of gold and have some very good widths once we get down to drilling. So it's a very classic model of an epithermal system, and I say we really don't believe it gets much better than that. So that's looking, as I say, from east to west into that previous plan view. Very similar thing looking now north to south. Again, we see this cap rock layer that's trapping fluids below it, and these are the areas we're going to be targeting in the upcoming drill program. And again, to support that, here's a chargeability, IP chargeability section, and we have a flat line IP chargeability anomaly at about 180 meter depth according to the IP, so that corresponds very, very well to this layer in here. And so, we know we have some fractures, particularly over in what we call the center vein, where a fault has allowed some of this to leak up to surface to where we see it in the discovery zone. But we believe much the better mineralization is going to be below this cap level. And so they're very much supported by good correlation between the IP and the magnetics. And again, note the shape of this magnetic low, how well it mimics that cross section of a classic epithermal system. So going into the drill program, we plan a 3,000 meter drill program to test particularly the center zone and the Hotter's Pond, which has had very good IP anomaly corresponding to the magnetic low. Say 8 to 15 drill holes, 3,000 meters, really focused on the conquest zone. 1 or 2 holes may test that we have a copper porphyry target up here. We're in 2023. We actually hit a little bit of copper mineralization, but the real focus is going to be on the what we call the center vein and the Hotter's Pond fault. And again, very low exploration cost due to the ease of access to root and cellar. All in drilling costs are about $200 a meter. And obviously, if you have low exploration costs early on, hopefully down the road this will translate, or should translate into very low development costs. But this is the planned drill program that we aim for later this spring or perhaps early summer. But this 3D shell model has now provided a very good visualization of how we think this epithermal system is manifesting itself at depth. And so, as I said before, epithermal systems are very known for their bonanza grades of gold and silver, and with grab samples up to 111 grams per ton gold, nearly 1,400 grams per ton silver, 700 ppm tellurium, and 10.5% copper, the high grades are very apparent. But a very select few of low sulfidation gold deposits are also associated with very large tonnages. And as you've seen, a very comprehensive exploration model shows that root and cellar could host a very significant epithermal gold system. But large gold systems are not just based on their footprint; they're also based on their depth extent. And as you can see from this magnetic modeling, that which shows that the system could extend to something on the order of 800 meters depth. And that system is intact, and we see it from the mineralogy and from the geochemical profile that is very, very well preserved. And to get to this stage, we've had multiple data sets, whether it's geochemistry, geophysics, mineralogy, physical observations, and geological. All the data sets very clearly point to the top of one of the vein systems. I mean, that's essentially what we're saying is the tip of the iceberg, and that would be the Discovery Trench area. But it certainly seems to link down to a much bigger body at depth. And all this is a very compelling evidence of a very large epithermal gold system at root and cellar. And to top that off, Northern Shield owns 100% interest in root and cellar. And this, you must remember, this is located in Newfoundland, minutes away from a paved highway and a deep water port. And when it comes to greenfield exploration for giant ore deposits, we don't think the evidence or the location gets much better than what we're seeing now at root and cellar. So that really concludes my presentations. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Awesome. There are some great questions in the chat, but I would like to run through a couple that I had for you first, if you don't mind, Ian. The first I'll ask is, you've previously drawn parallels between Root and Cellar and the Fruta del Norte deposit in Ecuador. I'm curious about, beyond the sinter terraces, what other geological similarities give you that confidence in making that comparison? And how are they different also?
Yeah, I mean, no two deposits are ever the same, but we often use comparisons just to help guide exploration or remind us of how these things may look. So, I mean, one of the key ingredients of Fruta del Norte was the identification of that sinter terrace. Now, in case of Fruta del Norte, that sinter terrace is actually quite extensive. That Root Cellar is not, probably because the different geographical environments that they form in. We think Root Cellar was actually in a mountainous terrain, and so you don't get flatline areas, very large flatline areas for these things to pool. So ours are a lot smaller, a little bit, distorted, but we have these sinter terraces, and they provide very good vectors to depth. The other thing is they also have leakage, and they have these weird dark rocks that they weren't really sure what they were. And we had the same thing in the 2021 drilling. I mean, Christine, our chief geologist, was looking at this mineralized rock, wondering what they were and how they fitted into the epithermal system. But now we believe too they are leakage. But then one of the differences, okay, they have a lot of manganese in Fruta del Norte, was closely tied to the very high grade. So far, we don't see a lot of manganese in the conquest zone. We do actually see stuff at Windfall. But I think one of the other sort of similarities is just the way they found this. This was, Fruta del Norte is a giant, I think it's 10 to 60 million ounce deposit. And they had very little indication of the actual epithermal system on surface. It was buried by 200 meters of sediment. At Root and Cellar, we actually see a little bit more, but it does show you, even if you have very little evidence, good geology, they vectored into it very quickly, but these things can be buried, but they, big discoveries do happen by just following a very methodical exploration program. So I think that's one of the great examples of Fruta del Norte, is just good geology, understanding the chemistry, applying a model to it and following through. But say all deposits are different. There's some similarities, as we've often said, to Hawaii and New Zealand as well. Sure. But it's really just understanding the system and using what tools you have to vector into mineralization.
Oh, great. One question I got now. Drilling costs $200 a meter. Obviously, that's remarkably economical. So I'll start the question there. But I'm curious, how has investor interest in Root and Cellar evolved as the mining sector just now starts to begin to turn positive? Are you getting increased attention from institutional investors, strategic partners, et cetera? Yeah,
we're getting increased institutional, even retail, more recently, other mining corporations. Especially with those people that understand these systems. I mean, the tellurium as well. For those that understand epithermal system, that jumps out as a pretty key indicator of, number one, epithermal hole, but secondly, something very large. And you don't expect this in Newfoundland very often. So it's the surprise of the tellurium, even the fluorite. There's a fluorite deposit just down the road from Root and Cellar. You go to Colorado, Nevada, they have a lot of fluorite associated with these big gold deposits like Comstock and Cripple Creek. So it's just it's a data, it's a tellurium, it's the rifting, it's the fluorite, the alteration. I said earlier on that we keyed in on a lot of our ingredients at Root and Cellar, other than just the gold assays. It was the alteration. I mean, these rocks are absolutely butchered by alteration, and large deposits are grown, and so they don't form overnight. They're grown, and that takes time. That's a lot of fluid pumping through the rocks, and that changes the rocks. And the thesis student, even when he was trying to understand what rocks we had there, he was looking at the least altered rocks, and even the least altered rocks were hard to recognize the original textures and mineralogy of these rocks. So these rocks are highly altered, and that's not lost either on some of the institutions that understand these systems. But I think too, it's just you don't come across these very often, and yes, greenfield exploration is a risk. Sure. But times have changed, and I mean, 10, 20 years ago, we read about discoveries often too late in in the northern miner or whatever. We did very rarely, investors on a mass scale have the opportunity to kind of see that develop. And through social media, including the Six platform, investors have a chance to slowly get to grips with the prospect and try to, de-risk it for themselves. They have better access to management and times too. I mean, right now, I say other than having events sort of sneaks sort of think of what could be a discovery, they have better access to management, and even their share prices. Share prices right now are sort of unnaturally depressed for most of the juniors. So they have a chance to get in sort of at a reset value and hopefully a sneak peek of that upturn in the Lassonde curve. So I think some people are beginning to recognize that despite the tough markets, maybe now's the time. With better access to management, they see the data, they have time to digest it and get comfort with it. It's still risky, but there is no reward without risk. And so, from the retail point of view, even up to the institutions, we're getting doing a lot more interest the past month or two.
I appreciate that.
Keep on developing the story and obviously knocking on a lot of doors, but it's beginning to resonate right now at all levels, from institution to retail.
Great. And yeah, it's never been more transparent, both the risk and the opportunity for investors. So it's an exciting time to be looking at projects. I had one. I know the slide showing the magnetic low shell model. It suggested a pretty significant depth potential at 800 meters. What depth are you planning to test in this drilling phase, and what technical challenges do you start to get to at those depths?
So we're going to feel the holes will be relatively shallow in and around the center, like 100 meters, 200 meters, just to kind of slowly track that down. But really what we're going to do, as I say, is try to hit it, below the 150 to 200 meter mark, which is where the sort of cap layer appears. So the vertical depth, depending on whether you believe the IP or the magnetics, is roughly between 150 and 2 meters depth. So we're not going to go down 800 meters right away. It's going to be sort of in the 200 to 300 meter window, which is ideally where we want to target. So some of these will be longer holes because we want to kind of test a variety of IP targets and magnetic lows as we go through them, particularly in this area here. You can see on the bottom right, we have the IP sort of on the flanks of this portion of the magnetic low. So should we be testing the IP? Should we be testing the center of the magnetic low? So some of these holes will be quite long, maybe 400 or 500 meters, but they're not necessarily going 400 or 500 meters deep. They're just the length of the hole, so we can kind of skewer right through this target. Challenges, hitting something 200, 300 meters down. These are not super long holes. They do deviate, so we can try to reduce that by certain drilling technologies, like core stabilization barrels. But there's nothing overly challenging in these. These are relatively, still short, modest holes at 200 to 300 meters vertical depth. I think one of the challenges actually is not getting phase. Like you can still, as happened at Fruta del Norte, you can be really close to these things and miss with not a lot of indication. And so you just got to be confident in your model and disciplined that if you happen to miss on one hole, don't think, okay, it's not there, and run 500 meters away. If you're confident in the model, change the orientation of the hole and try again. I think that's sometimes the greatest challenge, is not to deviate from what you always got to adapt to your model, but there's plenty of examples around the world where holes have just missed and you're still just meters away from world-class ore deposit. So just stick to the principles and the confidence of your model. Drilling, there's no real technical challenges here. These things may veer off a little bit, but we think it was a big enough target that Yale still hit something of it.
Great. I appreciate that. I know there are some comments in chat asking about details of the drill program. I believe your presentation covered a good number of them, so I won't delve too much into that. But just to reiterate, with the planned 8 to 15 drill holes covering 2,500 to 3,000 meters at $200 a meter, which is great, what specific question are you looking to answer with this program? And what results would be good enough, successful enough to expand the program?
Well, we're aiming to get right. We want to see sort of continuous good grades of gold mineralization, and this takes one good hole to get that. If you're lucky enough to set all the hard work and the evidence, it's sometimes you need a little bit of luck. But we think we can get down to this, and we want to find good widths and traceable mineralization with good goals of grade. I think even modest, if we had the same sort of values as 2023, but over a bigger drill program in these current markets, I think that would be okay. It fell on sort of deaf ears back in 2023, but that's because the markets weren't there. Gold prices were a little bit lower. But I think we're going to be I think we can get into the heart of the system, this drill program, and get at least in one hole some good continuous gold mineralization, and I think that could change this thing overnight very, very quickly.
Great. And now one thing, and this was reflected also in the chat, but also in emails that came in advance. What is the timeline for this drilling program, and just generally expected news flow for the rest of the year?
Well, we hope to get in here and drilling in May. Could be at latest, I think, early June, but we're really focused on May. We're just trying to, again, wrap up the last bit of the financing to get us there. We actually hope to be on the ground sometime in the middle of April, just because there is one target that, based on some of the modeling and new evidence, we think we really pinpoint an area that if we go and prospect, we can find another completely new zone of gold mineralization. It is in an area with not a lot of outcrop, but based on the geophysics, we can pinpoint an area, so we'll try to get in there and see if we can find any bedrock gold mineralization. But otherwise, the focus is to get to a drill program, ideally in May, if not very, very early June.
Great.
And, we think we're ready. We have the information to go and drill, and we think this can change in a hurry with this next drill program.
Awesome. Drill, baby, drill. That's exciting. Now, Wesley from the chat asked, I think I saw this question also on co.ca. What's the timeline for assays?
I think it's still the order. I mean, if you look at big batches of samples going in, it's probably on the order of 2 months. Samples can be rushed, of course, but you can't rush all the samples from a drill program like this. It's just too expensive. But we can rush samples. It's like 2023. We expect to hit some visible gold, and if that's material, we'll of course announce that along the way once we get it confirmed as visible gold. But I think 2 to 3, probably 2 months for complete assays from the drill program. But we hope to release those in batches along the way.
Awesome. And I'll just wrap up today by asking, what are you most excited about this year, Ian?
Well, it's a matter of doing this thing. I say, I don't think I've been on a project where so much information has come together and kind of pointing at the same model, pointing in the same sort of direction. And we've come close to some of these systems in the past, but I believe this is the one, and it's just a matter of getting to that drill program and hitting it. And I see this as very pivotal. A lot of good evidence pointing in the same direction that we could be onto something very significant here.
Awesome. Well, more news to come. Looking forward to it. I know there are a bunch of folks in the room today. Thank you so much, especially those who asked questions. If you got additional questions, please let me know. I can get you in touch with Ian as quickly as possible. And Ian, thank you so much. This was a great presentation. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you all.